Hello students, today we will start with Unit 3 Section 1, that is Henry a Chameleon, written by the author Ruskin Bond. Ruskin Bond is one of the most popular children's writers of today. He writes in a simple and delightful style. So students, let us read this amusing story of an unusual pet, a chameleon. Now students, you all might be having a pet at home. For example, a dog, a cat, or any birds like parrot or lovebirds, isn't it? Many of them like to have a pet at home. So same way, here Ruskin Bond's family is having a pet, and that is a chameleon. Okay, so let's see the lesson. Now, they have given their pet a name, that is Henry, a chameleon. So, a name is given to a pet, that is Henry. Understood? Okay, so let's start the lesson now. This is the story of a chameleon as a pet for Ruskin Bond's family. They have given a name for a chameleon, that is Henry. A chameleon is an ordinary reptile which is different from the lizard by certain outstanding feature. A chameleon's tongue is as long as its body. Its limbs are long and slender, and its fingers and toes resemble a parrot's claws. On its heads may be any of several ornaments. Ornaments means crests like those on the heads of parakeets and roosters. Henry had a rigid crest that looks like a fireman's helmet. Henry's eyes were his most remarkable feature. They were not beautiful, but his left eye was quite independent of his right. He could move one eye without disturbing the other, each eyeball bulging out of his head. Wobbled side to side, backward and forward. This frenzied means hyperactive, means the movement, gave Henry a horrible squint, and one look into Henry's frightful gaze was enough to scare people into believing that chameleons are dangerous and poisonous reptiles. So, because of its feature, all people are frightened of it. Okay? So now, this was all about a chameleon. Now, let us see the story. One day, grandfather was visiting a friend when he came across with a noisy scene at the garden gate. There, men were shouting, hurling stones, and brandishing sticks. Brandishing means waving, flaunting. The cause of the uproar was a chameleon that had been discovered sunning itself on a shrub. Someone claimed that the chameleon could poison people 20 feet away simply by spitting at them. The residents of the area had risen up in arms. Risen up in arms means protested. So what happened one day? Ruskin Bond's grandfather went to his friend. So while going, he came across with a noisy scene at the garden gate. He saw that some people were trying to kill the chameleon. So grandfather decided that to take that chameleon to his home. So he took it to his home. So in this way, the chameleon started living with them. And when Ruskin born a small boy visited Henry, he would treat him with great caution, sitting perfectly still on his perch with his back to him. Then it would stop and the other eye would begin an independent survey on its own. For a long time, Henry trusted no one and responded no one. Then Ruskin Bond used to put his finger into his mouth, but the chameleon would not do anything. The chameleon would not bite him. So, Ruskin Bond thought that his rigid jaws carried a number of finely pointed teeth, but Henry seemed convinced that his teeth were there for the sole purpose of chewing food, not fingers. Henry was sometimes willing to take food from his hands. This he did very swiftly. His tongue performed like a boomerang. Boomerang means a wooden tool which comes back to the person who throws it and always came back to him with the food, usually an insect attached to it. Although Henry didn't cause any trouble in their house, he did create somewhat of a riot. Riot means noise, confusion, and trouble. In the nursery down the road, it started out quite innocently. So something had happened. So let's see what happened next. When the papayas in the orchard were ripe, grandmother sent a basketful to her friend Mrs. Ghosh, who was the principal of a nursery school. While the basket sat waiting, Henry went searching for beetles and slipped in among the papayas. So what happened when grandmother was collecting papayas and filling up the basket? That time Henry was searching for food, means for insects. So while moving here and there and searching food, Henry fell down in the basket and no one noticed it, means no one have seen that Henry was in that basket. And then what happened? The gardener carried the basket to the school and left it in Mrs. Ghosh's office. When Mrs. Ghosh returned after making her rounds means checking if everything was running smoothly in her school. She began to examine and admiring the papayas. And suddenly Henry popped out, means Henry came out from the basket. Mrs. Ghosh screamed. Henry squinted up at her, both eyes revolving furiously. Mrs. Ghosh screamed again. Henry's color changed from green to yellow, yellow to red, his mouth open as though he too would like to scream. So Mrs. Ghosh was too much frightened by seeing the chameleon, as you can see in the picture, how she is screaming so loudly. At that time, the other teacher, the assistant teacher, came there and she also saw the chameleon and she also started screaming loudly. Henry was terrified. Now Henry don't know what to do. He fled down from the office, running down the corridor and into one of the classrooms. There he climbed up on a desk while children ran in all directions. So now children all are afraid and frightened of seeing this chameleon. So some are trying to catch the chameleon and some are trying to run away because they are frightened. Henry finally made his exit through a window and disappeared in the garden. So Henry went out through a window and disappeared in the garden. Grandmother heard about the incident from Mrs. Ghosh, but didn't mention that the chameleon was their pet because it might have spoiled their friendship. So she did not say that the chameleon was their pet. Grandfather and Ruskin thought that Henry would not come back to their home because the school was 3 blocks away. But a few days later, Ruskin found that Henry was sitting on the garden wall. Although he looked none the worse. None the worse means seemed all right. For his adventure, he never went abroad again. Abroad means out of the garden. So Henry came back and it was living there and it never went again anywhere far. Henry spent the rest of his days in the garden and he used to eat all the insects there. So this is the end of the story. So I hope that you have understood this story. This story is written by Ruskin Bond. Okay? Thank you.